All right, good morning, DevCrafters. This is John with JohnnyDevCraft, and we're going to look at some advanced configuration for Auth0 when working with your ASP.NET Core web APIs. So I'm going to take you through and I'm going to show you this library that I've created that's going to go up on NuGet a little bit later on today. You'll be able to go download this package and use it, but I want to kind of show you the code behind it. Just so that if you need to do something a little more custom or kind of take it a few steps further, you'll have the ability to do that. So we're going to take a tour of what's going on behind the scenes, and then I'll show it working here in a test harness that I've created. So to start off with, I love using configuration objects. I usually bind these to my configurations and my setups, and you'll see that a little bit later on. But this configuration object just has the authority and the audience string that's coming from my settings. And then I've got a couple abstractions here. I've got an iPermission validator and an iRole validator. And you'll see here in my service collection extensions kind of what those do. So first up, we've got two services that, two, maybe three services that you need to work with here. We've got three services, but only two of them. You'll only ever use two of them, hopefully. But maybe there's some advanced scenarios where you'd use all three. I just can't think of any off the top of my head right now. So I've got this add authentication with Auth0, and simply what it does is it configures your services collection with what you need for authentication to work. And it really kind of comes in and does a little bit of advanced stuff here. And actually, I got this in here because I was doing some debugging, but I'm actually going to pull this out. I really don't need this. All I need is this on token validated. Basically, we're going to add JWT bearer, and if you don't know what JWT is, that's a JSON web token, and that's what we're passing back and forth when we're using OAuth with Auth0. What we're going to do, though, is every time that token's validated, we're going to add a claim, and we're going to attach the access token. And I like doing this because I like having a reference to the original access token, just in case I need to call something else like the management API or the user info APIs that are available from Auth0. And then once I attach that, I'm just going to go task completed here. So not a lot going on here. This is pretty easy to set up. You can set this up directly in your setup your setup class. But I've got it kind of separated here, and it kind of builds it out for you. So as long as you can pass it an Auth0 config object, it can go ahead and do all that configuration for you. So then we get down into the next level, which is kind of setting up authorization. So authentication is, are you who you say you are, right? When you log in and you say, hey, I'm John Smith, here's my password to prove it, that's authentication. That's, okay, you are John Smith. Now we're going to get into authorization. And authorization says that as Jonathan Smith, I can do X, Y, and Z. So there's two types or two ways to approach this that I can think of at the moment. One of those is through roles. So you might have an administrator role and a user role, and based on that role, you determine what level of access you have. So I've set up this role-based authorization, and what it does is it adds policies to the authorization. And these policies, you can then pass the name of the policy to the authorized tag, and it'll go and check to see if that policy is valid for the user. And so basically what we're doing is we're requiring a claim that that role be listed as a role for the user. And really, this require claim that we have, it can support multiple roles, if you will. So what we're doing is we're passing in a dictionary of string and list of string inside that dictionary, and we call these role policies. And so you give it the first value here is the name of my policy, which I'm setting it right here when I create the policy itself. And then the list of strings are the list of the roles that apply to that policy. So for instance, you could say for this to run this method on my API, you need to be, you can be administrator or a user. You just need to have one of those two roles. So we call it everybody. So the policy name would be everybody, and in that list of roles, we would list all the roles. You would have the administrator and the user role would both be in there. So then when it comes back and checks later, it's going to say, hey, the everybody policy applies here, so they need to be they need to have one of these claims. They don't have to have them both, but one of these claims has to be here. So we're looking for either the role for administrator or the role for user. And then you could always set it to 1, so you'd have a policy for administrators only, and then that policy would check to make sure you have the administrator's role. You'll see some of that in use in just a few minutes. I want to move on to the next extension, and I can't think of a reason why I would do both of these at the same time. If you're doing complex permission-based authentication or authorization, then you would use the add permission-based authorization with roles. And what that's going to do for you, actually, this should be with permissions. I'm glad I caught this. What this is going to do for you is this is going to go through and configure everything to use permissions. And so permissions work a little more complex. What we do with permissions is we say, like an object, you have read access to it, or this object, you have write access to it, or maybe you have this kind of execute, or do this, do that. And then those permissions can be grouped and applied to multiple roles. And so then when we go to check your policy, what we're doing is we're looking for very granular, do you have this permission required to do this? So your role might be administrator or might be user, but you both have the my profile read permission. And so because that permission is applied to both of those roles, we don't care what role you have, but to load your profile, you just need to have the my profile read permission. And so we'll see kind of some of that come together, and we'll look at these permissions. But this right here is how we're setting that up. And this is just taking a list of permissions, and it's creating policies, and the policy name is the same as the permission name. So that makes it really easy when we're working with the authorized tag to pass it the right permission. Now, once we've got our services set up, so all three of these are setting up things that run in our services collection, then we need to configure our pipeline. And so I've got 3 methods here that help with that. One of those is use custom email claim. Now, I ran into some problems when I was working with Auth0, and we'll jump into Auth0 in a few minutes and go through the setup of Auth0. But trying to get the email back out of it was kind of a royal pain in the arse. What I ended up having to do was create a rule that returned a custom claim. And because that custom claim can be different for everybody, because I'm using test.johnnydevcraft.com as part of my claim value, or claim type, name, whatever you want to call it. I can't think of the proper term at the moment, but because I'm using that and you're probably going to be using something else, I really needed to come up with a way to kind of get us all on the default claim type. And so if you look at claimtypes.email, it has its own claim type that you can see it there. It's using the email address claim type, which is part of a specific schema available through XML SOAP. Anyhow, this claim type for email, it doesn't generally have a value. And so what I do is in here, I'm pulling that identity and I'm looking for my email in there using that claim type. So the johnnydevcraft.com/email, and then I'm making another claim using this claim type and just mapping that over. And so this will live in our pipeline for our requests in ASP.NET Core, and it'll actually take and map that. So this is our own little middleware that handles that. Next, I have two different middlewares, one for using roles and one for using permissions. And if you're using roles, it takes a list of roles, and basically it's going to go check and see if your user has that role available for each role. Now, I've created an interface here called the iRole validator, and if we look at the iRole validator takes a claim identity and takes a name, and it checks to see if that claim's identity has that role. So in order for this to work, you have to have in your services a scoped iRole validator. So you're going to have to add a scoped iRole validator to your services collection in order for this to work, and you can go and implement that. You'll see my implementation is pretty simple in my harness. I'll show you that in a minute. But if you need to access your database or access whatever data layer to figure that out, however you need to put that together, that information would be handled inside that iRole validator. So now we have that iRole validator, and we're looking to see, hey, does this user have this role? And for every role that it has, it's going to add a claim type role to it, and you'll have a claim on that user object for roles. Now, if you're using role-based authentication from Auth0, it'll send it with roles automatically, so you really don't need this. But if you're handling all that internal to your application and you've got your own permission system and you're setting all that up in your own application as a customized system, and you're not using role-based authentication from Auth0, then this kind of allows you to customize that however you need to. In your iRole validator implementation, you can be going to the database and checking to see if that user is part of this role or that role, or has this permission or that permission. And that's really easy to do. Moving on down here to permission, works the same way. I'm just looking to see if you have that permission, and we're using that iPermission validator. And so these together really are just kind of here to simplify the process of setting up Auth0 to do some complex scenarios inside your code. So I've created the testing harness here, and it has the legendary weather forecast controller. And if you spin up a brand new ASP.NET Core Web API, you will get the weather forecast controller. And if we go look at my weather forecast controller, the only thing I've done is I've added this authorized here, and I've said, hey, you need to have the administrator policy. The administrator policy is based on the administrator role. Now, I've also got this current user service that I've created that implements my iRole validator and iPermission validator. And if we look at this, all I'm doing is I'm checking to see if my email address is the email address attached to that claims type, and if it is, then I'm returning true that I have every role. If it's any other user, then I'll just have user. When we get down to permission, I'm saying basically everyone can read the weather, but only I can write the weather. And so I have a weather can read permission and a weather can edit permission. So the edit permission will only get applied to me because the email address will only be applied here. And same thing here with the administrator and user roles. And then here you can see I'm building that dictionary of policies. So this is kind of what it looks like. I've got the every role policy, which has both the administrator and the user roles. I have the administrator policy, which has the administrator role, the user policy, which has the user role. And you can create as many of those policies as you need. And you can load them anywhere you want. I just chose to do it inside of this current user service. So let's go and take a look real quick at Auth0 and how we're going to set this up over on the Auth0 side. So in my magical application here, I am really focusing on my code utilizing just the authentication mechanisms in Auth0. So authorization is going to be handled 100% inside my application. And I tend to lean this way, although I will say that they do have a really nice roles-based authentication system here, and you can set up scopes and manage scopes, which are basically your permissions, and you can get a lot of control and granularity here in this product. Although I found that you tend to pay for that, and you can get a free account with Auth0 and do all the stuff that I'm about to show you in my application. But you know, you pick which layer you kind of want to work with and how you want to handle it. I personally like having more control. That's just kind of my way of working with it. So we'll look at the users that I have created. I'm on the wrong tenant here. Let me switch over to my harness tenant. There we go. Now I'm in my harness tenant. And let's go ahead and look at my APIs. And you see I've got my custom API here. That's my harness JDC. I'm using the audience WebAPI. I have an application here that I've created that is my Swagger application. And this is going to be really important if you're using Swagger. You're going to want to make sure that these callback URLs match the callback URLs in your application. And by default for Swagger, it's going to be this auth0 redirect.html, and then whatever your host name is. You can see I really haven't done any of the other information on here. Although in a use case where you actually have a client outside of Swagger, you're probably going to want to jump in and have a little bit more in here. So if we go look at my users real quick, you'll see that I do have one user in here. It's John at JohnnyDevCraft. Let's go ahead and add another user for testing. And we will add test at JohnnyDevCraft.com. And I'm going to go ahead and set a password here. And that password is just going to be welcome. Yeah. So if you want to come and play with this, you are welcome to get into my test account and do whatever you want. Oh, it's not good enough. We'll do welcome one. And it's still not good enough. We'll do welcome one bang. I'll get a password that works here eventually. Yeah, there we go. Welcome one bang. That will be our other password here. And then the other thing I want to show you is I've set up a rule here. This is how I'm getting the information to. I have this add email to token rule. I'm going to edit it real quick. And you'll see basically what I'm doing is I've created a namespace. Test.johnnydevcraft.com, and I'm adding email tokens to both the ID token and the access token. I'm adding emails to both the ID token and access token. It's a really simple rule to create. What I will tell you that I learned is I can't just do email. You have to have a namespace because it just coughs and hiccups and doesn't like you adding things to the token that don't have a namespace. So you have to create the namespace and then do it like that, and so this is how you do it. Make sure your namespace can be whatever you want it to be. This is the part that's completely custom, right? But it does have to have a namespace, and you do have to have. You can't just use email. So I learned that the hard way. I spent about an hour futzing with that. My pain, your triumph. You're welcome. Moving on from here, we've got everything set up. We're going to go jump in, and what I do want to do is go back over here, though, because you're going to see this client ID. This is kind of important. As we jump back over into our code, we're going to look at the startup class. And here in the startup class, I'm setting up my Swagger gen. And I'm going to do a video on setting up Swagger to be able to do what I'm about to show you, because by default, if you've got a secured API, the default Swagger configuration just does not work really well. But this isn't very difficult to set up, and I've actually created a library for making it even more simple. And so I'll do another video and show you that probably here next week. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Swagger, into our Swagger API and actually play with some of this. But let's look at our API. We've got the controller here that's restricting to this policy, which of course is making sure that I am an administrator. And if we look at the startup, we're adding role-based authorization with roles, and we're adding authentication with Auth0. So both of those are in there. Notice that I'm adding my iRole validator, iPermission validator. Those are both current user services. And then, honestly, I don't know that I need this one. I could probably do without it. But I am getting it. In fact, I don't think I do need this one, because they're already in there. So I am getting back the oh, that's why I did it. That is why I did it. So because here I'm getting a type current user service back, it's I gotta have this one in, and that lets me pull back that current user service. which is also an iRole validator and iPermission validator. And then these are actually used down here when I use roles. So you can see I've added authentication, which that has to be there. And then I've added authorization for roles. And I'm using that get role policies from my current user service. And then when we get down here into the pipeline, notice that I use authentication. This has to come first. So that will tell it to actually create my my claims identity. Then I use a custom email claim. There's my custom email claim right there. Then I tell it to use roles, and then finally I tell it to use authorization. So you want to make sure that you start with authentication, and then if you've got to set up your email claim, then you do it here. Then you're going to add roles. Excuse me. And then we'll add use authorization. And all of this needs to come before you use your endpoints. So that's pretty much the gist of it. It's all put together. You can see here that I'm also loading my Auth0 config. Right? And if we go look at my app settings, you'll see that I have the authority and the audience listed there. So that's it. There's not a lot to it. It's pretty simple to set up if you're using the library. You can see I didn't have a lot of complex setup to remember. It's just kind of all here. So we will run this, and let's go take a look at what this looks like. So this will spin up, and I'm going to start here. I'm actually going to clear any cache that I have. Right, there we go. And it's important, I've got this client ID right here. I'm going to need that, so I'm going to copy that, and I'll click Authorize. It's going to ask me for that client ID. I'll paste it in. And then I'm going to go ahead and tell it, hey, I want OpenID profile and email. And then I'm going to go ahead and authorize. Now, I'm going to start by doing my test at JohnnyDevCraft.com. And then this is that welcome one bang. There we go. We'll log in. And it's going to say, hey, do you want to give access? I'm going to go ahead and authorize my Swagger to do things on my behalf. And there we go. I am now logged in. I'll hit the close button here, and I should be able to get this weather forecast. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. And we'll run it. And we'll see here that I did get this user identity. It's got 11 claims on it now. That's because it's gone through the pipeline, and it's pulled this test Johnny DevCraft email claim out, and then it's reapplied it as the standard email claim down here. You can see both of those claims are now present. So I will go ahead and continue running. And oh, I got a 403. Well, I kind of expected that to happen because the only person who has administrator access is John at JohnnyDevCraft.com. So let's go back in here. We'll log out, and let's close this. I'm also going to clear any cache that I might have, and we will go ahead. Oh, got to grab this. We will paste this in and authorize. And this time we will use JohnnyDevCraft. I'm not going to tell you what this password is. It's super secret. We'll log in, and now I'm logged in as JohnnyDevCraft, which is great. We'll come in here and try this out and hit execute. And there we go. We got our results back. So this time it said, hey, John is part of the administrators group, so give him what he asked for. That's wonderful. Now let's go look at real quick how we would set this up to use permissions. Not very different. So we're going to come in here, and let's just go look at our permissions real quick. Just refresh our memory. We have two permissions, whether can edit and whether can read. We are going to use the whether can edit, even though I'm not going to edit this. So I'm just going to use it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here to my controller, and we will paste that in here. So this will be the policy we're looking for now. But we do have to set some of that up, because right now we're using this role-based authorization with roles, but we're going to switch to permission-based with permissions. And this time it's going to take a list of permissions, which is going to come from our current user service dot get permissions. So that will set up the different claims that we have for permissions. So, or the different policies that we have for permissions. And then down here, we need to tell it to use permissions. And of course, we need to get permissions. So that will basically create any permission claims that we need. And that's the change that I need to go from being role-based to being permission-based, which kind of gives me more granularity over how I control the individual aspects of my security across my application. So you can choose however deep you want that layer to go. You know, this will work both ways. I showed it with roles before. We're about to look at it with permissions. But let's go ahead and spin this up. And let's see this in action. I gotta be honest, I haven't really tested this just yet, so I'm hoping this works, because I'm gonna feel really stupid if it doesn't work, but then we'll go take a look at it together and fix it. But hopefully that's just not the case. Hopefully it works. So we'll sign in, and we will try it out. And hey, look, we got them back. Now, just to make sure that this isn't a fluke, let's go here and log out. Close that. I'm going to clear this, and let's log back in. Oh, got to go copy this. And we'll authorize. This time, let's do test at JohnnyDevCraft.com. And we'll do that welcome, one, bang, and log in. There we go. Now we're logged in, and we're expecting to see a 403 here, that we're not authorized. And that's exactly what we get. So there you go. That's role-based authentication, or you can do permission-based authentication. Both of those are very useful when writing an API and building an application. And now you have a really quick, easy way to implement it, and kind of a little bit of an instruction manual in case you need to customize that for your own specific needs. I will also try and host this information out in my GitHub and share a link to that, so that you guys can go look at that code and make use of it if you have the need. This code is configured for .NET 5, but most of it will work just fine with .NET 3.1 if that's where you're at. And if you're on .NET 2 or older, then yeah, you should get with the current times. This will not work with OWN-based security in ASP.NET Framework 4.72 or prior either. But there we go. That's the basis of authentication using Auth0, and I hope you guys find this useful. If you do, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.